Welcome, everyone. We are having a special guest today, Gail Williamson, who is the director of the National Equal Justice Association. I'm going to turn the presentation over to her. She has an enormous amount of very interesting information to share with us. Take it away, Gail.
Thank you very much, Marianne and Roberta and new friends, hopefully, at League of Women Voters. Welcome today to today's National Equal Justice Association's presentation, organized today for climate change solutions. We are otherwise known as NEJA for short. Next slide, please. Thank you. My name is Gail Williamson. I'm Director of National Equal Justice Association. NEJA is an all-volunteer 501c3 organization founded by clergy, attorneys, and community activists to aid locally based efforts fighting to end patterns of injustice, particularly those encountered by the most poorly paid workforces of the nation. For over 40 years, as an all-volunteer organization, we've aided self-help grassroots, community-based organizations of farm workers and service workers and other low-paid workers in the struggle for nutritious food, clean and affordable water, healthy and safe living and working conditions, and other survival necessities. These are groupings which are hit hardest by environmental degradation. NEJA accepts no government funding or strings attached funding, so we are an independent nonprofit. Next slide, please. 1 in 3 residents, U.S. residents, have experienced some kind of natural disaster over the past 5 years as a result of global warming and man-made climate change. More and more communities are being impacted by drought, water shortages, wildfire, extreme heat, or severe flooding. These and other climate extremes are also raging across the country and across the globe. 23 million Americans live in areas affected by intense heat and high energy costs. Heat kills more people than any other weather phenomenon. So we're in danger. Thank you. Last year on Earth Day, I don't know if you know about this study, a Pew Center Research Center study stated that as of Earth Day last year, 75% of Americans believe that our burning of fossil fuels is contributing to climate change. 42% believe that addressing climate change should be President Biden's top priority. Next slide, please. Thank you. You may recall that during the COVID-19 lockdowns, we had blue skies because there were fewer combustible engine vehicles on the road. There was a 60% reduction of drivers and an 80% reduction of public transportation use, enabled many cities to see blue skies for the first time in years. Emissions of greenhouse gases plunged 6.4% in 2020 during the lockdown. I'll quote, after analyzing the emissions data for 6 economic regions across 69 countries, a total of a 17% reduction in daily CO2 emissions was observed by April 2020, in contrast with the mean level in 1919. By June 2022, however, as the US and the world, quote unquote, opened up, the air pollution and greenhouse gases rebounded to and exceeded the pre-pandemic peaks. Next slide, please. Thank you. In today's world, these man-made disasters from environmental disasters resulting in this climate crisis have increased unemployment, poverty, hunger, and homelessness. Not only have climate refugees reached 25 million people worldwide, but the number of climate refugees is expected to double within the next 5 years. Add to this the threat of pandemics such as COVID-19. These pandemics will become more and more difficult to eradicate because of the instability and poverty of the Earth's populations and the overburdened and unprepared health systems in many countries worldwide. The recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, known as the IPCC, issued a report in March 2023. Some of the data was rather startling. Human activities are responsible for approximately 90% of the increase in atmospheric CO2 concentration since the pre-industrial era. More than 90% of excess energy stored in the climate system is going into the ocean. Extreme heat waves, heavy precipitation, and droughts are becoming more frequent and intense in many regions of the world, and these trends are projected to continue. Climate change is exacerbating existing social and economic inequalities, with the most vulnerable populations and regions hit hardest. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the world is on, quote, a highway to climate health with our foot still on the accelerator. In other words, our Earth and life upon it is in trouble. Part of that report said we have 30 to 40 years before we are reaching a point where life will permanently change. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we are facing a challenge of historic proportions. The big question is, what is standing in the way of the U.S. developing and implementing a comprehensive plan to fight global warming and the man-made climate crisis? Next slide. Thank you. National Equal Justice Association's fundamental goals and founding principles are aligned with the 17 goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, agreed to by 193 member nations of the United Nations in 2015. They were produced through 3 years of debate and negotiations among all nations and consultations with hundreds of NGOs, associations of peasants, farmers, laborers, women, scientists, health professionals, local government officials, and others around the world. Surveys were taken in towns and villages in every region. The 17 goals include, you can see here, no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, clean water and sanitation, air, life on land, life below water, and justice for all. Many countries in the world are working to implement these integrally related solutions in their countries. Next slide, please. Despite the U.S. being a signatory to the 2030 Agenda and the 17 SDGs as they're known, the U.S. has not only not implemented the SDGs, but has not created and empowered government bodies to be responsible for defining and implementing a national plan, in contrast with many countries that have done exactly that. There has been pretty much a mainstream media blackout about the SDGs. Meanwhile, the cornerstone of the U.S. energy strategy since 2005 is hydraulic fracturing or fracking. And more recently, as consequence, also liquid natural gas. Fracking, you may be aware of, is the oil and gas drilling method that breaks up shale rock. Today, fracking produces 79% of the U.S. natural gas and 65% of U.S. crude oil. The U.S. is the world's biggest exporter of liquefied natural gas, known as LNG, which uses fracked gas and generates the equivalent of 400 metric tons of carbon each year. Fracking operations, that's okay, just hang on to that point. Fracking operations also release methane. Every part of the transport and drilling and storage of natural gas releases methane, which is a greenhouse gas 86 times worse than carbon dioxide for the first 20 years of release. Over 17.6 million U.S. residents live within 1 mile of at least one active oil or gas well, which detrimentally impacts not only the air and water, but public health, climate stability, farming, property values, economic vitality, and quality of life. So, those are some of our problems. Now, this is a hopeful presentation. Our point is that there are solutions. There are existing technologies to deter and stop accelerated destruction of the planet's environment. There are really more solutions than there are problems. On the one hand, we have to, 1, stop the destruction that is occurring now. 2 major courses of action. Stop the generation of greenhouse gases by taking polluting technology offline and using technology that does not pollute, number 1. Number 2, stop the destruction of the environment and poisoning of the air, land, and water. Second is to implement the tactics and technology to clean the air and the water and restore the land by removing dangerous toxins and gases. The dichotomy of these problems and solutions are interconnected. Next slide, please. It's going to take a 2-pronged approach. One is to build organizations to contact those individuals and groupings who see that we are running out of time. And the time is now to seriously address the climate crisis, and through this, build the demand for the creation of new renewable energy and living wage jobs to build and install the infrastructure and technology needed to fight this crisis. The second is to organize and demand our local, county, regional, state, and federal government leaders install the SDGs. Next slide, please. Many organizations here in the U.S. are already doing the work of the SDGs. They are building solutions consistent with the SDGs, whether it be environmental groups that are cleaning up their streets, their water, their air, and their local community, or in nonprofit organizations that are doing food distributions and trying to alleviate hunger or homelessness. There are civic organizations that are fighting for environmentally clean solutions. However, we are finding in our outreach and phoning that many of these organizations are not aware of the Sustainable Development Goals and don't even realize their work is consistent with them. Secondarily, one of our analyses on this anniversary, or close to the anniversary of Earth Day, is that poor and minority communities have not had the resources to participate in the social and environmental justice movement. Of course, that's our core constituency. Next slide, please. Our campaign aims to unite concerned individuals and organizations. First, we're informing people about the SDGs, telling them what they are, and then to unite groupings, anyone concerned with the state of our Earth and the future of life upon it, including humans and animals, since we are in a mass extinction right now. They call it the 6th mass extinction, but is to unite groupings to demand implementation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in the US today, given that sustainable solutions do exist and time is running out. Next slide, please. Sustainable solutions abound. Reforestation is a major one. We just heard that, for example, the Colorado River is lower than ever. We've heard some of those stories, and the federal government has announced that they're going to restrict the allocations to various stakeholders in that water source, which of course affects Southern California and other communities in the Southwest. Well, of course, that's one big step to take, we have to ration. But in the short term, that's a short-term step, we need to clean the water. We need to reforest. Quality reforestation replaces trees that have died or have been cut down, combined with the quantity that is planting new trees in an area that didn't have them before. Afforestation is one of the most successful ways to mitigate greenhouse gases. We've been in touch with a group of scientists that are based worldwide called Eco Restoration Project. And they have told us that they call, on the one hand, yes, we need to take out carbon from the atmosphere, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but reforestation, replanting wetlands, restoring the natural resources of the earth actually cools the planet much, much faster. And they are trying to get that more on the agenda coming from the UN level and other international bodies, because they say carbon capture is not fast enough. Our position is we need all of it. Many government and non-government organizations directly engaged in afforestation programs. There are huge projects in Africa. They call it the Green Wall along the Sahara Desert. They're taking areas and replanting and literally restoring water, restoring the economy of local towns and cities with the communities themselves involved in the planting of the trees. NEJA is supporting, for example, the Arbor Day Foundation. I'm sure you've heard of that mighty organization that has planted, 500 million trees so far in neighborhoods, forests, and throughout communities. We are supporting a low-income grouping in Sacramento that's, it's a service worker organization. They've started, their members have decided to start a program because there's a huge gap between the number of trees in the low-income neighborhoods and how much, green canopy. You may have heard there's often a 10 to 20 degrees difference in heat because of the lack of canopy. And they've started a program to organize tree planting, and with members doing the planting and help of businesses and organizations like Arbor Day to, again, reforest areas and things like that. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, forests and other wildlands now absorb 13% of US carbon dioxide emissions. Tree planting is a science, like everything else, but the climate sciences tell us these are solutions. Such projects need to take place under the advisement and supervision of those who understand which trees are indigenous to an area, which will best survive and perform advantageously in sequestering carbon. Next slide, please. Restoring lost coastal vegetation and expanding coastal habitats can sequester very high amounts of carbon and protect the coastlines from erosion in the face of rising sea levels. It includes grasslands. Peatlands are huge carbon sinks. Coastal vegetation such as mangroves, seagrasses, and plants existing in tidal marshes are carbon-rich ecosystems that sequester even more carbon than forests. We interviewed a man who runs a business down in Southern California, and he manages and has built a kelp farm along the coast there. And one of the most remarkable things he said to me, we were interviewing him for an article for our newsletter, the NEJA Bulletin, was, did you know that kelp eats nitrogen for breakfast? No, sir, I didn't know that. He said, yeah, not only is kelp is sort of like, it captures nitrogen, will eat nitrogen and obviously provide oxygen in the synthesis process. He said, if you surround, we've heard about these huge dead zones in the ocean. It's like, oh my gosh, all the fish are dying. Nothing can live there. He said, if you plant and manage kelp forests around those dead zones, is what we're calling them, because no life can live in them, you can revive those areas. And that is remarkable. But of course, it's going to take resources to put into that. But remember, kelp eats nitrogen for breakfast, as an example. Next slide, please. Soil-based carbon sequestration is a negative emissions process because it removes carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases from the air and stores it. Soil is another major carbon sequestration element. Soil accounts for the sequestration of over 1 billion additional tons of carbon each year. At this point, the world has destroyed at least 80% of our soils. And some of that is by our agricultural practices, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Some of it is just flat out destruction. The other part of it is desertification of the soil by overuse and actually by tilling the ground, which a few years ago, about 6-7 years ago, we went to a conference called Soil Not Oil Conference. And my colleague and I were in the front row, close to the front row. And there was a picture of a farmer, 500 years ago, tilling the soil with a plow. And the first thing that the conference MC opened with was, here to talk about healthy soil practices. And we'd like to start out with the fact that tilling the soil as we have for about 500 years is actually not good for the planet, and it's not good for the soil because it destroys the biodiversity and the microsystems that are beneath it by destroying the roots. And so when I say desertification, the healthy agricultural movement and sustainable management of soils needs to go back to practices that are more akin to that are obviously sustainable, but don't destroy what can hold water, clean water, like forests and trees, and also provide healthy food systems. Next slide, please. Direct air capture, you've probably heard of this. Our plants are a technology that commercially sucks carbon dioxide from the air. These plants can be constructed by cities and industrial areas to capture carbon from the air. The carbon that is captured can be used for fertilizer, for greenhouse gases, to produce synthetic fuels. To put this in perspective as a growing technology that cities and towns can embrace is the fact that 100 years ago, most municipalities did not have water treatment plants. It can soon be the same for direct air capture plants. Some cities are creating circular systems in that regard. Many large corporations also utilize carbon capture technology on their factory smokestacks and sell the captured carbon as a byproduct. This type of technology can and should be mandated throughout the world. Ultimately, if we transfer to more renewable energies, we won't have to capture carbon, but for the time being, we certainly do. Next slide, please. Mass timber panels and cross-laminated timber is another carbon storage technology that is really kind of amazing. It's been mostly developed out of Oregon, but countries like Japan also use mass cross-laminated timber. They call them CLTs, and they've been proven. You can see the construction is obviously cross panels, but they've been proven to be stronger than steel and more resistant to fire than any other building material. CLT construction includes technology that can resist collapse in an earthquake. Western European countries, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and also Washington State are other areas that are implementing CLTs. The technology can be utilized that we can use pine that's been killed by beetles, for example, and other damaged wood to make use of that wood and to make timber panels. CLT panels can also be manufactured using trees that are thinned out of the forest as part of fire prevention technology. It's critical to thin forests so that they can protect themselves, that the trees that do stand are stronger. One of the reasons we've had, it's not the only reason, a lot of these things are obviously intertwined and interconnected, but one of the reasons we've had such extraordinarily huge and volatile fires is because we're not managing our forests properly. Next slide, please. Protecting and restoring rivers and river fauna and flora, including fish, can be accomplished by paying farmers, ranchers, and other landowners to plant trees along their banks to cool the rivers. Cities, counties, and states, along with the federal land, must also be mandated to deploy this technology. Oregon is a state that is starting to implement these kind of laws and regulations. There are many ways to restore a river. One is removing dams, especially those where the infrastructure is antiquated and deteriorating. 2, halting the dumping of pollutants, garbage, sewage, and other harmful elements into rivers and streams. 3, restoring floodplains and meadows, which are the most biodiverse and productive lands on the planet. This enhances the region's ability to raise the quantity and quality of water. Preservation of floodplains can reduce downstream flooding and filter excessive nutrients and replenish groundwater. Protecting and promoting nature's engineers, depicted here. Sometimes beavers have been badmouthed, but they actually build complexes in rivers and streams that are 3 times more resistant to wildfires. In keeping the water on the landscape, beavers reduce the risk of fire, recharge groundwater, and mitigate drought. Their ponds help migrating salmon and other fish survive at a time when a number of salmon species are considered endangered. Also in Oregon and Washington, they've implemented where to help the salmon get on upstream, dams that they move by the flowing water, but they also help the fish go upstream and downstream by using wind and water power. So there's a lot of new technology for sure. It's very exciting. Next slide, please. Thank you. Reverse osmosis is an effective means to desalinate saline water, but it is more expensive than other methods. As prices come down in the future, the use of reverse osmosis plants to desalinate large amount of saline water should become more common. These plants are being used all over the world, and different companies are increasing the ability to use solar-powered desalination plants. In 2022, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, you know MIT, I bet, developed a passive solar desalination evaporation system, which could be used to clean the wastewater, provide potable water, and sterilize medical tools in off-grid areas. So the technology is always improving, and we need more of it. Next slide, please. Rain harvesting, as you probably know, is collecting the runoff from a structure or other impervious surface in order to store it for later use. Obviously, communities around the world have used this method for centuries, if not millennia. Traditionally, it involves harvesting the rain from a roof. The rain will collect in gutters that channel the water into downspouts and then into some sort of storage vessel. Rainwater collection systems can be as simple as collecting rain in a rain barrel, or as elaborate as harvesting rainwater into large cisterns to supply your entire household demand. In the recent rains we had, the atmospheric rivers, terms we had never heard of even a decade ago, or I hadn't, we lost a lot of ability. There was so much rain, you know, the land was dry. I mean, some places obviously flooded because they couldn't absorb the water. We had experienced already a year or two, almost 3, of drought. So the land was very dry. It couldn't absorb the water, and it causes more floods, but we also lost a great deal of water we could have captured. There's a back and forth there. We could manage that much better. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite. I don't know why. I love this idea of fog catchers. Maybe some of you have heard of them. Fog catchers are a meter by meter of stretched out mess over often copper piping. It doesn't have to be copper, but it allows the fog to condensate into droplets of water and flow down toward a bucket or a barrel below, where it can be measured and captured. One panel, one fog catcher, can produce 150 to 700 liters of fresh water per day. Given we in California are in a fog area on this coast, I think this would be fantastic if we could put more of those in here. They are very prevalent on the western coast of South America, places like Peru, etc. Next slide, please. Drip irrigation systems, I'm sure you have heard of. It's a type of micro irrigation that's designed to conserve soil nutrients and to minimize or prevent waste of water. Most drip irrigation systems use a design that directs water directly to plant roots. It can be used in households, gardens, things like that, but also in huge plots of agribusiness, agriland, and is being used where a farmer has those resources. Next slide, please. Regenerative agriculture, I talked about that slightly, include sustainable pest management. It also includes water reduction, preservation of land and forests, and natural cultivation of healthy soil, and encouragement of biodiversity and climate resilience. Farmers can cultivate quality soil by creating environments for beneficial insects and bacteria. That is, instead of using pesticides or chemicals like are found in Roundup, which is particularly bad for the environment, but also the health of pretty much all living beings because of the glyphosate used in it. Other things to do to keep crops healthy and soil healthy is to rotate crops so that you don't overuse the soil. The best practice, that's one of the best practices, also to use cover crops in the off season and rotate grazing animals. Insectaries, like a company, one of the biggest in the world and the pioneer in this, Rincon Vitova, they were founded by a University of California at Berkeley professor. The company was founded in the 50s. They are promoting sustainable pest management using what they call bugs to fight bugs, natural enemies of pests. It's also known as microbial and invertebrate biological control agents, or BCAs, to manage insects and use non-toxic pesticides. They have helped farmers, homeowners in California and practically every state in the nation and internationally do this. And it's called SPM for short. For example, there are black ladybugs that feed on insects infesting oranges, exotic plants, and Christmas trees. There are tiny wasps that lay eggs in housefly pupae to prevent an infestation of butterflies. When used in conjunction with traps and fungal spray, these wasps are useful in reducing housefly populations. The biological control products industry is forecast to grow 14% in the coming 6 years. It's a growing thing. It's the more progressive way to do farming, with more microbial and botanical products along with their good bugs to help bridge the gap when nature's food web isn't keeping up. Next slide. Renewable energy, I'm sure you know about solar and wind. Solar radiation is light, also known as electromagnetic radiation, that is emitted by the sun. While every location on Earth receives some sunlight over the year, the amount of solar radiation that reaches any one spot on the Earth's surface obviously varies. There's a scientist whose name is Mark Jacobson, who studied the ability to power our state and country, and ultimately many countries in the world, by renewable energy, i.e. wind, water, solar, hydro. He did his initial study. It was around taking other scientific studies and found that it's 100% doable. His project is called the Solutions Project. I didn't put it up here. It was an error. Sorry about that. And a lot of the scientists and a lot of people were saying, well, what about storage? You know, this very fact that obviously the wind doesn't blow all the time, the sun doesn't shine all the time. What do we do about storage? And he said he answered that question. He updated and wrote a book about it. And he said, storage is also 100% possible. So there were a lot of people that denigrate this, and it's not to say that there aren't problems with solar energy. There are. You have to use a lot of energy to produce the solar panels. There's some components that are not the best for the planet. But overall, if you compare solar and or wind to the use of fossil fuel, the cost benefit is still better, and the technologies are improving. So our goal is to promote what is more more progressive for the earth and for the environment and for all of us, all life on it, including human beings. Next slide, please. Hydropower, we've talked a little bit about, one of the oldest and largest sources of renewable energy. It also has its positives and negatives. Uses the natural flow of moving water to generate electricity. It's still cleaner than, let's say, the crude oils coming out of the tar sands or natural gas itself. Hydropower currently accounts for 37% of the total U.S. renewable electricity generation and about 7% of the total. Pumped storage hydropower is a type of hydroelectric energy storage. It is a configuration of two water reservoirs at different elevations that can generate power as water moves down and up to the other, passing through a turbine. That was what I was trying to get at. This is a much more scientific definition. Next slide, please. Geothermal energy is heat derived from within the subsurface of the earth. Water and or steam carry the geothermal energy to the earth's surface. Depending on its characteristics, geothermal energy can be used for heating and cooling purposes, or can be harnessed to generate clean electricity. However, for electricity generation at high or medium temperature resources is needed, which are usually located close to tectonically active regions. But it is harnessable. Next slide, please. Transition to a plant-based diet. A lot of people think, oh my goodness, how could we ever do that? We could save millions of acres of farmland by reducing meat and dairy consumption, stated Lisa Wade, member of the plant-based advocates of Los Gatos, An Oxford University study released in 2018 by Joseph Poore stated that without meat and dairy consumption, global farmland use could be reduced by more than 75%, an area equivalent to the US, China, and the European Union and Australia combined, and still feed the world. That's a remarkable statement. A vegan diet is probably the single biggest way to reduce your impact on the planet Earth. Not just greenhouse gases, but global acidification, eutrophication, land use, and water use. Far bigger than cutting down on your flights or buying an electric car, as these only cut greenhouse gas emissions. It's also generally better for you. Next slide, please. This is one of the more recent fantastic scientific solutions we found out about. Scientists at Utrecht University in the Netherlands have discovered 50 species of plant-eating mushroom, sorry, I said that wrong, plastic-eating mushrooms to deal with millions of tons of plastic waste in our oceans and landfill. Scientists at the university say that the biggest obstacle to implementing this on a mass scale is funding. Environmental businesses and organizations such as Rincon de Tova are coming up with oil-eating insects and other places. There's a study at Yale University that have found that there are other insects and worms, roundworms actually, that can eat oil. So these are really fantastic, hopeful solutions we need to implement. Next slide, please. PFAS is, I don't know if everybody knows what PFAS is, but it's a carbon chain that is apparently found in 99% of us now. And scientists have tried for years to find ways to break down PFAS. It's an 8-chain carbon, an acronym for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. On Thursday, researchers, this was a couple of months ago, Northwestern University published a study showing that PFAS can be destroyed using two relatively harmless chemicals, sodium hydroxide or lye, a chemical used to make soap, and dimethyl sulfoxide, a chemical approved as a medication for bladder pain syndrome.
Sorry.
There are communities, so they have just discovered how to break it up and they're looking for industrial applications. So it's also very exciting. There's a movie I'll refer you to called Dark Waters about the production of PFAS by DuPont Chemical and the effect on a community in the Southeast and the legal fight against DuPont to stop production of PFAS. 3M also made it. They still make forms of it. Next slide, please. We also, NEJA promotes, there are community organizations around the country, including, fighting for progressive solutions, but also to stop the petrochemical industry from growing. This is an example. There was a year-long battle to stop the chemical company Formosa from building a massive petrochemical complex along the Mississippi River in southern Louisiana, known as Cancer Alley, and they were successful after many years in stopping the construction of that plant. Next slide, please. So we hope you will join us in building solutions. We always need volunteers. We use community organizing. We need writers and editors and researchers for our NEJA bulletin, speakers. We do telephone outreach, informational tables. We like to speak at any kinds of house meetings, organizational meetings like this, conferences. We do film showings. We have a sustainable development poster, and we do poster canvases. Those are the kinds of things we do to unite people in this fight for positive solutions. Next slide, please. Individuals can always put up posters, invite people. We have what we call a climate change presentation, which is a lot like the one I just did. Once every 4 to 6 weeks, it's a positive thing. There are solutions, but we're going to have to fight for them. If you'd like to host an event or a climate change presentation at another arena, you can always invite your friends, families, and colleagues. We always need subscribers to our NEJA bulletin, things like that. Next slide, please. Environmental, civic, and other organizations can also promote the SDGs themselves. Publicize the SDGs on your website, literature, at conferences, forums, and other events. We can help you do that. We are developing tools for that very thing. We think more people need to, one, know about them, and two, realize, like this organization is promoting SDG number 6 because we're working on clean water, that kind of thing. Invite a NEJA representative to speak or show a film at a house or neighborhood or organizational meeting. Request SDG posters from us to put in your neighborhood or community, that kind of thing, or bring to an event. Next slide, please. We hope you'll join us. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Comments? Hysterical outbursts?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Were there things you didn't know? I mean, that's part of the thing. Some of the, we're always looking for things to publish positive solutions in our newsletter. Or you knew about the SDGs, I suppose.
I didn't know, I'd heard of them, but not a lot. But what I really learned about was those mushrooms. I like that.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, and they are also discovering, as you mentioned, that there are other organisms, insects and other types of biodiversity type organisms that will eat plastic. And so they're experimenting with those, but I'm sure that the plastics industry is lobbying against
Mhm.
these folks. But no, that's fascinating, just fascinating. A lot of it we probably knew, but there's a lot of those little things, that details that you shared. Are you going to be, do you know about the Cupertino Earth Day Festival that is this Saturday?
I know about it because you sent me an email on it, and we may be able to come. We are supposed to attend an Earth Day, the San Francisco Earth Day event here in San Francisco. We'll see if we can divide forces. We might be able to.
Okay, is it this Saturday also? You're in San
Yes.
Francisco? Okay, yeah. Oh, well, anyway, I might be able to post your little poster at our table. We are gonna be
Okay.
there. We're gonna be there.
Great.
With bells on. And and I wanted to mention that you certainly, all of the work that you do is certainly in line with the league positions on the environment.
Saw it right there.
Oh, yeah.
So are there some projects that you're currently working on that you would like to share information on with us?
I think one of the things I wanted to see and talk to, your group in particular, to be able to, we have an ongoing, this is our main project, is to unite groupings behind these SDGs. In other words, your group is promoting, really just institutions, I would say, about the overarching purpose. I mean, again, I'm not in the league exactly, but the overarching purpose of the league is to establish just institutions and democracy consistent with goal number 16. Now, my pitch to you is would you consider putting that on your website as a way to promote and advertise one, because if you said this organization is working for goal number 16 of the 17 sustainable development goals. Now, community residents will ask, what are you talking about? And you would be able to help promote what the SDGs are and how your organization is doing the work of them by publicizing efforts for sustainable growth in your area, and also just institutions. So that would be a way, a step to take. It's not a huge step, or you add it to your promotional literature. Does that make sense to you? We're sort of, that's kind of our something
Well, the
you'd
League
be.
of Women Voters has something called policies, which is the things we stand for.
Yes.
And we have a whole set of policies in regard to our support of the environment. And in that set of environmental support, certainly what you're doing is something that we would say, we support what you are doing in support of what we support. Does
Right.
that make sense
Also,
to my fellow
our-
leaders?
Our DEI, diversity,
And
equity,
diversity.
inclusion, is all of this, justice for people who need help.
Yes.
So, it just includes everything, but I have to get to another meeting and I'm going to say goodbye and thank you very much. This is really
Oh,
good.
great to
very much
see you and meet you.
For coming, Roberta. Thank you. Yeah, what Roberta is saying is that, and what Marilyn has mentioned, we have specific positions on, but we have a whole raft of positions that are around the environment.
Yes.
And what I would like to do is look at those and send you that piece of the positions, because the positions cover,
That's
I mean,
good.
what,
That's a
like,
really good idea.
it was like 50 some positions or something.
Oh, good.
And
All
and
right.
some of them are, I mean, they're all related, and they're all
Yeah.
part of our defending democracy.
Mhm.
But there are some that are specifically devoted to the environment.
Yeah.
And I'd like to take those and look at those and present to our board.
Okay.
This is how we can support another organization and partner with the work that they do that also supports what we are for. That's
Exactly.
the sort of thing, I think. What do you think, Marilyn?
It's a line, which is what exactly what we're trying to build. That's exactly what we need, because I mean, I didn't exactly say it, but that idea of there are many organizations, I started with it, but the idea of building a unified group, a stronger voice of those 10,000 organizations. I mean, it may not be that many, but that vision is kind of where we want to go. That'd be fantastic. Yeah, I'd love to look at those.
Do you want to pull that stuff, Marianne, or do you want me to do it? Okay, so you
Yeah, we
go
can
ahead
put
and do it,
together
and we can send you the portion of our stuff that is specifically on the environment, and maybe you can pull out of that the things that specifically relate to what NEJA is focusing on. Especially if you got stuff that's really targeted on the South Bay for us, that would be super.
That would be
Okay.
perfect. That way we could use that and put little blurbs into our newsletter publications.
Yep.
And on our
put that
website.
stuff on our website.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. All right. That's a great plan.
And I think that's the kind of partnering that we are looking to do. So you get our message and we get your message, and we share the message among our various constituencies.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you so
All
much, Gail.
Well, thank you.
I learned
Thank
a
you for
lot.
having me. It was fun.
And we'll
Except for the-
talk some more. We'll send you the information, and I will see if I can print out your lovely little poster, because I think I've printed it out once already. And we'll have it at our booth at the Earth Day Festival.
Okay, great. All right, nice to meet you, Marilyn, and thanks, Marianne.
Well, thank you.
great
We'll be
day.
talking.
Bye.
Okay, yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.